super excited to be here with Michael Ventura, the author of Applied Empathy, among other things. So first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, no, happy to do it. Thank
Awesome.
you.
So before we get into the book, Michael, I want to talk a little bit, for anybody that's watching, a little bit about your background prior to the book, what you've been up to and what you're doing.
Yeah, so for the past 16 years, I've run a strategy and design practice called Sub Rosa. We work with lots of large organizations and startups and nonprofits to really help them think about organizational design, brand strategy, and ultimately bringing the best of themselves out into the world.
Awesome. So now we'll talk about the book, and I think the first thing, sometimes these words like empathy, we all think we understand it, but if you talk to people, you get all kinds of different definitions. So how do you define empathy as you approach this?
Yeah, so the type of empathy that we're particularly working with in the book is cognitive empathy. And so for that, we're thinking about it, and the way we define it is self-aware perspective taking to gain richer and deeper understanding. And self-aware is obviously a loaded term because it's hard to be wholly self-aware, but are you aware enough of your unconscious bias, of your whatever it might be that's kind of coming with you, that's coloring a situation? And can you step outside of that enough so that you get a richer, deeper perspective of someone else, uncolored by your own bias? It's important to also say, there are other types of empathy, affected empathy, somatic empathy, which are different and have other roles to play in the world, but where we really zero in and where we think organizations can win with empathy is in cognitive empathy.
Cognitive empathy, awesome. Okay, so now we have empathy, it's applied empathy. So when you put those two words together, then what's that definition become? What is applied empathy?
Yeah. Empathy unto itself is inherently neutral, right? You could spend a lot of time getting to know me and ask me a bunch of questions and gain a much more rich perspective of me. But then you could go on with your day and do everything the way you've historically done it, and you will have not applied that understanding to do anything different in our relationship. And so therefore, it's kind of time not very well spent, right? So what we try to do is think about where and how will you apply this understanding in order to put that empathy into practice, right? And so how might you change your culture? How might you change your products or services? How might you change your recruitment and retention strategy? Whatever it is, that's ultimately going to take that insight and make it more meaningful and create more impact in the business.
Got it. So it's all about listening, right?
Yeah.
Listening to the people that you're working with,
yeah.
Which is a big thing for us as well. So that was a really great story, like ground level with an organization. But if we broaden that, and you're talking to organizations in mass, right, and saying,
yeah.
How can we support them to bring more empathy or applied empathy into the workplace in general?
Mm-hmm. So there are a couple different buckets for that. The first is the company itself internally, right? So what is the thing that makes this place tick? Do you have a sense of that? Do you genuinely understand what value you bring to your employees, right? Are you training that into your employees? Because we all see these brand books, right? Like the brand book that says, has a bunch of pretty pictures and a word on it that says integrity, right? Or whatever the word is, or words that you've chosen. But how do you make that real for an employee? Are you thinking about, in an organization that has hundreds of thousands of employees, let's say integrity is that word, and let's say you're a systems administrator who sets up the email accounts and gets the overall kind of IT system humming. Well, what does integrity mean for you? And how does that become real in your day-to-day job? Because if you don't know that, then it doesn't matter, right? Then you're not doing the real work to make that empathic connection between value and mission and someone's day-to-day job. Right, so that's an important area for it. But just as equally is about thinking about your customers and your consumers. And when I say that, I don't just mean end consumer, of which there are probably multiple subsets. Right, you've probably got 5 or 6, maybe even more, depending on the organization, archetypes of consumers. But then you've also got the media and different types of media, and how are you planning and building strategy around that? Because if you were a reporter from the Financial Times, we'd probably have a very different conversation than if you were a reporter from BuzzFeed. Right? Like you're going to be interested in different things. So what's our strategy and how are we thinking about that? Shareholders, prospective employees, current employees, what's the entire audience map and how are we being empathic to all of them? Those are some of the ways that organizations can start to put it into action quickly.
Got it. Okay, so we've gone broad. We talked about a story. We've talked about, we've spoken about organizations. Let's go into the individuals. What would you say to just any random individual in an organization and what they can be doing? Because I think it's really important that we all are part of culture. The organization's not going to give it to us. And also, what would you say if you're talking to an executive around bringing empathy and these things into the workplace that historically have been maybe not for the workplace?
Yeah, they're deemed soft. I would say first on the individual side, start with yourself, because most people think about empathy and think about another. And one of the most important places to start with empathy is having empathy for your own state of being, right? Where are you in your career? Are there skills that you're trying to develop? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Have you done bias training? If you haven't, you probably should, and start to understand where are your biases and how are those informing how you operate inside an organization. Really making, kind of like what I said earlier about our company, really making yourself your own first project in this work and understanding yourself enough, because if you don't understand yourself, you're going to have a very hard time understanding other people, and even more so, understanding how other people interact with you, right? So that's first. On the executive side, what I would say is when people hear empathy, they hear being nice, they hear sympathetic and compassionate and things like that. Those are side effects of empathy at best. But what we really want organizations and leaders inside them and executives inside them to be aware of is that bringing empathy into the culture of an organization, into the processes of an organization or the values of an organization can help with recruitment and retention, can help build high-functioning teams, can help build a sense of collaboration and inclusivity, particularly in a time where we've gone through everything in the past Me Too movement that has sort of really shined a light on dysfunction inside organizations, tons of diversity and inclusion issues that have emerged as a result of that. All of those things can be cured, or at least better identified and help us lead to a cure through empathy.
Empathy. I love it. And a lot of it just keeps coming back to that idea of listening, right?
Yeah.
And truly listening. Awesome. Thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks.